This is Jay with Behind the Grind, the Professional GM Chronicles. Thank y'all for joining us today as we have special guest Casey with Narrative Feats. He was kind enough to allow us to have a interview with him, and we are just blessed to be able to do this. Casey, thank you so much for joining us today.
It is my pleasure.
Casey, if
Thrilled to
you
be here.
you wouldn't mind, Casey, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, I've been writing professionally for the last 15 years and voice acting even longer than that. My work includes more than 50 feature screenplays, 3 seasons worth of animated TV scripts, 2 animated trilogies, a pair of graphic novels, a trio of short murder mysteries, and a lot more. I just love stories. I have a bit of a problem. Um, I also create, produce, and host Narrative Feats. It's a tabletop anthology. Our first season of stories, Anywhere But Now, won Best Actual Play Podcast at the TO Webfest just last year.
That's awesome.
It is. It felt really good. I also host and produce The Joy of GMing, an interview series where we talk with GMs, game creators, and other experts just like you.
That's a little intimidating. I'm just telling you now.
We're all friends here.
All good. If you wouldn't mind, what first drew you into tabletop role playing, and how did you become a game master?
That is an excellent question. I started with LARP, actually, not tabletop. My first game was Vampire the Masquerade, which we played in high school and ran and played in college. I came to tabletop later than that, but I got my start storytelling by running the game at my university. Like we started out fairly small, but at our biggest, we had well over a dozen players showing up for our games. That felt pretty good. A friend introduced a few of us to GURPS, and we played that for about 6 months together. And later on, we got much more into the Dragon Ball Z tabletop game, which was insane.
Nice.
We played that one happily for years. I regret to say that I did not come to D&D until much, much, much later. By the time, so the first, after taking a long break, the first game that I story told was Doctor Who. I love Doctor Who. I adore the series, classic and new. It's how I met my spouse, running a game of Doctor Who. And I was thrilled with the non-violent aspects of it, of like getting the hoist themselves by their own petard, turning the crowds against them, etc. And like had a real yen about like, well, I'm not really big into combat, having completely forgotten how much I loved Dragon Ball Z in college. And then I started watching Dimension 20, where the combat is always so exciting, and I was like, oh, we can make it like that? Awesome! And since then, I have been making up my own combat-centric games, Sladium games, which is a combat adventure. Like, it is a fight to the death every single time, and I can't get enough of it. But yeah, I love combat, I love D&D, and I love collaborative storytelling. That is the mot juste for me.
What's been your most memorable campaign, and what about it made it stand out to you?
That is a great question. I would have to say the first season of Anywhere But Now, Doctor Who actual play, because I took a dozen different stories that I had turned into mods and had this wonderful table with just dynamite chemistry go through each of them together, and watching the choices that they make turn the game on its head and turn later games in completely different directions based on stuff they had done, 4 games ago, was so satisfying. And at the end of it, it felt like we had told an entire season of stories. They were each self-contained, but they were all part of a larger narrative that actually went somewhere, and I found that truly satisfying. Like, I'm working in other arcs and things now, but like as far as something that has had a beginning, middle, and end of like a satisfying conclusion, I would definitely say the first season of Anywhere But Now.
Oh, fantastic! That's awesome. Have you ever had a session go off the rails? You've got a couple hundred games to your belt with your start playing games,
Hmm.
and so you've had a
Hmm.
good a bit of experience, a lot more than someone like me. But have you ever had one of these games go off the rail? And if so, how have you handled it?
Games can go off the rails. It's not like it devolves into a quote session of Monty Python and the Holy Grail or anything like that. But to my detriment, one of the first, so like before we landed on our cast for Anywhere But Now, we had another cast that I was trying out. Like it was their beta game, their session zero, and like let's see how their chemistry is together because this group of people had not played together before, and it was a great table of players, but the chemistry wasn't quite right, and things got derailed when they flat out broke a plot device that was absolutely crucial for part two. Like it was broken and meant they had absolutely no chance of getting through part two alive. And I was like, oh boy, we got to take that back to the drawing board. And like it taught me that your story cannot hinge on one thing that has to happen because there is no guarantee that that thing will happen the way that you need it to. So that has helped me be a little looser with the guidelines that we follow. They had a good time, but they did not make it to part two.
Okay, if you don't mind, who or what inspires your approach to game mastering when you first started? Do you have any role models?
Yeah, like honestly, I was inspired as much by what I did wrong as the things that I got right. Brennan Lee Mulligan is a huge inspiration for me just in terms of the energy and like the bombast that he'll bring to a table as much as anything else. But like so at two different games, players let me know after the fact that they had not had fun. And the first time I had made the mistake of not embracing a solution that I had not thought of. They were trapped in this box essentially, and they pulled out the squareness gun that I'd forgotten they had and tried to use that to get out. And for completely pig-headed reasons, I just and with almost no justification told him that it didn't work. And the player knew exactly why it didn't work. And I felt like such a horse's ass after that I promised myself I would never do that again. The second time, a player after the game called me out because it had felt more like exposition to them than gameplay and choice. And that one stung because at the time it was true. Like, I try to learn from my mistakes, I try to learn from other people's mistakes, and like constantly trying to improve. Like, there's this thing where like once you get to a point of oh I know what I'm doing, that your cup may or may not just wind up full, where you stop looking into new ways of doing things, where you stop looking at new ways to improve on what you've already got going. And I feel like that is death to a good GM, because once you're convinced oh I know what I'm doing, to the point of like arrogance or like the exclusion of new ideas or new concepts or like that could be even better next time. Um, if you're getting in your own way of learning new things, I think that is a detriment to a GM.
Fair. Well said. If you don't mind, we're going to pivot a little bit. Let's talk about your philosophy
Sure.
on game mastering. Okay.
Absolutely.
How do you balance narrative storytelling with player agency? And we talked a little bit about, how
Hmm.
people do just however you want to interpret and go on it and stuff like that. It's up to you. But I've been accused of being heavy-handed, which, as you said, is true. So I'm trying very hard to learn to let go more so the story can
Hmm.
go where the players go. But how do you handle that?
Well, I like to balance narrative storytelling with player agency by starting out setting the scene with immersive detail. I paint a picture. Like, I use sensory details. I bring in comparisons to memories that the players can relate to.
Okay.
I might make emotional comparisons to like beats in their life that they've had before. And then I give the players free reign. Like, they can go off and explore things, they can lift things up, poke them with sticks, like grab a random NPC on the street and like start a conversation. And as long as the players can see that their choices matter, and they have opportunities to discover, that makes it feel more real to them, and that's when they come back for more.
Okay. Have you ever had any disruptive players at your table, and how did you handle that?
I have. It's not like I've had like aggressive players
Mhm.
who would like try to start shit with other players at the table, but I have had players who, can talk for minutes at a time without drawing breath. And I've had players who, like, without being asked, they just jump in with law adjudication or rule adjudication of the game that they are not the dungeon maestro of. And like when that happens, like I'll just gently remind them that I can handle it, that I've got it covered. And with the more talkative players, the ones that can ramble,
Mhm.
I might encourage them to let some air in the conversation. Or if it when it is their turn to like really get into things, I might say, in 100 words or less, tell us so and so, as just a gentle reminder to like keep it to something manageable so that other people at the table still have time.
People pretty good about receiving that. I mean, to be called out as a spotlight hog is not something that people either intentionally or unintentionally like that. But if you handle it that way, has in your experience, people have been pretty receptive and or gracious about it.
Something that I had to learn the hard way was that like the reason we tease people is to like just gently try to correct something that we think that they're doing that we think is wrong, that we think is inappropriate, stuff like that. That is the highest intent of like gently teasing someone. That's not bullying, that's not mocking, that's not, satire.
Hmm.
But like with just like a gentle nudge of like in 100 words or less, like it's the softest way that I've found to let them know that they could spend a few or less words on their answer, and like they'll chuckle and they'll move on. And personally, I've found that it has not turned into an issue.
I like that. I like that approach. I think that's a very valid way of doing it. That's cool. Uh, what do you think of the game master should prioritize? Rephrase the question. Do you think a
Sure.
game master should prioritize the story, the rules, or the player's enjoyment? Keeping in mind that we're dealing with paying players. So, what's your experience
Mhm.
on that?
Well, I think it may be a mistake to try to think about it as like one of the three is most important. I happen to feel that two out of the three are more important, so I spend more time balancing. Um, uh, I spend more time balancing the player enjoyment and the story that we're telling. My philosophy is that it is collaborative storytelling. I am not the director on a set. I am a conductor with an orchestra, and we are all here to make sweet music together. Like, you can have the brass and the woodwinds and the percussion and everything, and if the percussion starts to drown out the woodwinds, we bring them down gently and we bring up the woodwinds and we make sure that they have a time to shine and everything like that. Like, it's about the ensemble. I've said in the past that it's not the player two show with the supporting cast of four other people. It is an ensemble. Everyone is here. Everyone is paying the same amount. Like, everyone deserves to have that same opportunity to shine.
Love the visual aids, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So you touched on this a little bit, but if you don't mind unpacking this, you talked earlier about immersion. How do you, with the painting of the picture, do you have any other tools or gifts or things of sort that you use to really get the players immersed into the story?
Absolutely. Since the lion's share of my games are online, I use Roll20. So we've got maps that I've built out on Incarnate with a K. It's a great map designing website that I use. I also use a ton of music. A lot of it is from Tabletop Audio.
Hmm.
It is a wonderful site worth being part of the Patreon. Tim is awesome. They also have a wide library of background sound. And so, like, I have a big background in voice acting and in audio adventures. I think one of the reasons that we did so well at the TO Webfest is because of the level of immersion that we set, because we have the bedrock of the background audio, whether it's like the gentle murmurs of a tea shop, or the clanking in an iron foundry, or the buzz of hovercraft overhead at an outside 51st century science center. Like, we paint the picture with the audio, then we bring in the music that sets the tone that we're looking for, and honestly, like I'll frequently use music from TV or film in the genre that I am employing, to help set the scene with music, either from tabletop or from one of these other sources, that like I know captures the mood that we're trying to go for. And my players have never really complained with, like, we're halfway through the paragraph of dramatic narration, and then I click on a new track so that the tone of the story can shift and take another direction. Like I mentioned, I love to use sensory details. The smells of sawdust and dried blood hits your nose. The air is warm on your skin. You can hear the crowd roaring outside. You are at some sort of sporting arena, and they are having a ravenously good time. And by setting up these emotional comparisons to go along with that, it really helps to capture the mood or the vibe that we are going for. And my secret weapon, which I use every game a lot with every player, is frequent checking in. This is where the dungeon maestro method comes in, because regardless of who is at the table, every single player will have at least one or two moments where I will check in with them and put the spotlight on them and say, Arboglar, you can't help but be reminded of that terrible night in the woods. Your friend lay bleeding out on the forest floor, and it was partially your fault. As that shot rings out in the here and now, what are you feeling? And by asking them that question, what are you feeling? What are you thinking? It does a whole bunch of things. Number one, it gets them more into their character's skin. It puts them more in the moment we're experiencing, and all the other players at the table get that insight into what they're feeling, what they're thinking, and it is that much easier to engage in the role play with them, because you suddenly have this insight into, like, oh my god, that's why they carry that gun, etc.
Very cool. I can definitely take some lessons out of that. I appreciate you sharing that. That's awesome.
My pleasure.
Okay, so this is going to be the most controversial question that you're going to run into in this entire interview. I've warned you. Are you ready for this?
Bring it. Bring it.
What's your stance on fudging dice as a game master?
Okay.
Dun 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 dun.
Dun dun dun. I will not fudge whether or not something hits. Like, a hit is a hit and a miss is a miss. Like, to futz with that does not seem fair to me. However, I have been known to round the damage up or round it down to give everyone on the team a chance to get a really satisfying hit in. Like I said, this is not the Player 2 show with a supporting cast of 4 other people. It is an ensemble. Everyone should get that chance to shine. So, like, if the bard who has been doing a lot of support cantrips finally steps up and slashes at the thing, like, if I can round up the damage like a point or two to get the character to bloodied so that they can see they had an impact, I will do that. The same way that, like, if the heavy hitter has, like, really given the NPC a wallop, but they still have 3 hit points left, but that was a climactic event of a hit, then he's toast. I am a big believer in the rule of cool. I am also a big believer in like, what helps the narrative flow, because we are telling a story together, and stories are satisfying when they have peaks and they have ebbs and they have transitions with comic relief. Like, we need to hit all of these different places, and if we stick only to what the math rocks dictate, then sometimes, that can just, like, put a rock in your shoe when you're that close to finishing out an epic fight,
Yeah, very good. Let's pivot a little bit and let's talk
Sure.
about crafting worlds and narratives. Your approach specifically.
Mm.
How do you approach world building in your campaign? Do you build top down or bottom up? In other words, do you start where you have a big map and we're going to start at this point on the map, or do you start your players like we're in the village of so and so in the tavern of such and such, and you guys have gotten together for, and then from that point build out the world around them as the game advances? What's been your experience?
There's a couple of ways to answer that because, like, from just the creation aspect of it, like, I start with the big picture.
Hmm?
Like, I might, so, like, one of the campaigns I'm running right now is called Adrift, and with a Y. And it's basically conceptually Lost meets the fantasy elements of Pirates of the Caribbean, with, like flashbacks that will take up half of an episode or half of a game, while the other half will have the players on the island where they have been stuck for some time with no weapons, no armor, no magic items, and basically no idea how the hell they got there. Likewise, I have the Sladium, which is this massive arena that they're introduced to, but there are so many different levels to explore. Like, they start off in these barracks with tattoos that let them know they are prisoners and that they cannot commit violence while they are on this side of the doors. But then they are given the chance to look for weapons, and they step out onto an arena that they have no idea what it's going to be, and then they see the big picture of, holy crap, I'm surrounded by thousands of spectators. There's a maze in front of me, or a Jurassic jungle, or an icy wasteland. And like, practically, it's great to start out with the big picture and then, like, scope out an acre and say, okay, here are all the details we're going to fill into this acre, so long as we know it connects to points A, B, and C, and we can fill those in before next time, etc. As long as it all meshes and fits inside that big picture, I find that to be really satisfying.
Excellent. Okay, so let's talk about NPCs. What's your process of
Mm-hmm.
crafting them, and what do you do to make them stand out?
Well, I lean on my background both as a voice actor and as a writer. I am the first thing I do is start with a single memorable characteristic. Like, it's great to have like a varied cast of NPCs where they all are like diversely filled with all these self-contradictory deep elements, but odds are that's not going to be the case for 99% of your NPCs. So I start with one single memorable characteristic and I embellish around that. We have a character in the Sladium, one of the NPC fighters that comes along to like soak up some damage, land some hits in case you get into a tight spot. And his name is Lugwad. He is a great big sweetheart who is absolutely deadly with a spear. But like, the detail we started with was this big, heavy Germanic voice, and he's just a bit of an okay guy, you know, buddy? Hey, looks like you took a real roll about there. Are you all right? And then he offers you this ham hock-sized hand to help you to your feet, like you weigh nothing. And like, when you focus on just that one detail and build off of that, the players' reactions will be like fireworks. They love Lugwald in the Sladium. Like, when he goes down, they're like, um, and the reverse is also true. Like, on my adrift tables, the first mate of the ship that they start the adventure on, that will crash or get lost in a hurricane and so forth. It could be different for each table. The first mate is this lizard kind named Clacknack, and he is a jerk. He is antagonistic and does not really go into why. And the players have latched on to hating him like you would not believe, just because he was antagonistic at the start. And since then, like, we've had a couple of episodes or games where Clacknack has either been working to help out by prepping potions that you didn't bother to ask him about because you already decided you don't trust him, or Like you're sent to find him and he's missing, and you find like he's got a little portrait in his room of his family and a little piece of the shell of his kid, that the egg they hatched from, and they're like, I don't care, I hope he goes to hell. um, like once they've made up their mind, once they've decided that they like or they hate this character, like no matter what you bring from that point on, it will still only reinforce those existing feelings. It's like, oh, is Clackback missing? Good. I hope he went to hell. Which is just a lot of fun. But like the detail that you bring does not have to be the accent that they have. It can be how old they are. It can be how strong they are. It can be how smart they are. It can be how fast they are. It can be how big they are. I teach this character voice workshop where we cover a ton of different ways to find and lock in to those character voices, both like creatively as like this is where they're coming from as a character, this is what they want, versus this is how they sound, and we can embody that sound and start to give it some real personality and some the longer we spend in that character. So starting with just one significant detail and embellish from there, I find is a great cornerstone to start with NPCs.
Very cool. Very, very cool. What advice do you have for GMs who struggle with improvisation during sessions?
Well, I would say try to get comfortable with yes and. Get comfortable with loosening your grip on the reins of the story. Get comfortable with the notion that you may sound a little clumsy at first. I still sound clumsy from time to time. It's okay. Like if you can give yourself permission to sound a little foolish because you are going to sound foolish, it gets easier. It gets easier with practice. The more that you trust your brain, your own brain, it's like doing a trust exercise with your own brain. The more that you trust your own head to be able to keep up with what your players bring to you, the more you'll find it does exactly that. I'll give you an example. Like, so we've got this theme park planet of a game for my Doctor Who setting. And one of my players plays this dingbat of the best possible kind named Calamity. And I love how she leans into these weird decisions. And like they find that information they want is not available to guests. And she's like, okay, can I have a job interview? And rather than say, maybe later, like I'll say, yes, you can. A robot drops out of the sky with a questionnaire and a little thing to sign on its chest and like goes through an incredibly short but satisfying job interview process where 5 minutes later, Calamity's got a map, a mop, and a jumpsuit and an all-access pass I was not planning to give them that'll let them into places that otherwise they would not have been able to get into right away. It's fine to say yes and, but like if you can put an exclamation point on that, if you can put some enthusiasm into agreeing with those strange choices, it'll make for stronger storytelling and more a satisfying experience for your players.
That's awesome. That's excellent. Okay, we're going to sidestep a little bit. Now we're going to talk about Pro GM questions. And these are questions that were kind of developed by other wannabes like me for people like you that are living the dream. But first one is, what does a day of a Pro GM look like?
It looks like a lot of things. So when I'm not looking for other work, I split my time between working on maps on Incarnate. I am working on the campaign guide for Sladium games. I'm fleshing out the next chapters of the beats of what my character is going to be playing in Adrift or Curse of Strahd. And I also balance time posting gaming ads on a handful of places, including Reddit and my Discord and social media. When it is time to plan for a specific session, then I know that in that 3 to 4 hour session, we're going to have about 5 to 7 beats across those 3 to 4 hours. So I delineate what those beats are likely to be, and then I make sure that every player at this specific table will have at least one opportunity to do something I know they enjoy. Like, if one of the players really digs crunchy combat, I'm going to try and make sure that he has an opportunity to do that. And if one of our players is super into puzzles, then I want to make sure that she's got something confusing to noodle over and really spend her time thinking about. And if one of the characters is just super into roleplay, I want to give him someone that he can bounce off of and have that experience. It's not too hard once you like just do that prep work of like, okay, fight scene, investigation, and role play for so and so, and like you can space those things out. And by relying on the earlier thing I mentioned about like the spotlight on a character where we check in with them mid game or give them like a 2 minute flashback. Um, One of our characters is a gunslinger in Curse of Strahd, and he went to an academy to learn sharpshooting and the rules of killing werewolves and vampires and all that thing. And he told me enough of his backstory that I could incorporate flashbacks to meaningful moments for that character that would screw with him. Like, it's not just happy memories and, oh, that was a good time. It's like, no, this was one of the worst nights of your life. And it just makes it that much more real for them in surprisingly still an enjoyable way because he likes the grim, dark, gritty backstory stuff. So it really feeds into his enjoyment, I've found. Um, yeah, like, one of the pitfalls I try to advise players, GMs not to fall into, don't plan the ending. Only plan as far as what will happen if the good guys do nothing. If the good guys do nothing, then the doomsday computer powers up and the massive fifth dimensional being leaks out and takes over the universe. Look. Or, the Minotaur is going to murder the damsels and the crowd's going to eat it up. Like, I leave the third act essentially open completely to how the decisions they make up to that are going to create the ending because they're going to make choices, they're going to make jokes, they're going to find loot or devices in the map essentially, that will inform their choices and take the story someplace that they want it to go beyond just like, well, we have to pull in for a landing right on this landing strip or otherwise no one's going to have a good time. No, it's not like that.
Okay. So that brings up an interesting question. As a professional game master, okay, I assume that most of the games you run are campaigns as opposed to one shots. Is that fair to say?
It's actually almost split. So I've got campaigns of Adrift and Doctor Who and Curse of Strahd running. I also run a fair number of Sladium games across the month that are one-offs. Like, that is designed to be a one-off. You can bring in a level 10 PC, sit them down, burn all their resources in a 4-hour game with a bio break at the halfway point, and then go on with your lives. And at the same time, players have come around enough times for that. I was like, okay, we'll do a monthly campaign of Sladium, where once a month you start here, you end there. And honestly, by making that setting into a campaign, it releases the tension of, well, they have to finish this dungeon in the next 4 hours or we don't tell a complete story. With the end of the monthly table's first game, they are only about 2/3 of the way through the first maze of the Minotaur that they've found, and they like that. One of the players at that table is one of my biggest repeat customers, and she made a point of saying afterwards that like she really felt more grounded in and not rushed to like reach the finish line in 4 hours. And I find that very satisfying.
That's excellent.
Yeah, like campaign telling is its own set of challenges because in addition to telling a good story now, you also have to keep an eye on where the story is going a week from now, a month from now, etc. And I'm not saying plan out a month in advance. Don't do that. You're going to be wasting a lot of your time. But stay flexible, keep an eye on where you want things to go so that after the game, you can figure out, okay, here's what they're going to be doing the next time we get together. And what I'll say, though, about the one-off games, I'm incredibly grateful for the concept of permanent prep. Because like I love using Roll20. I will set up a VTT of the Arctic tundra and people it on the GM level with all these ice themed monsters. And then I don't have to do that prep again. Like I can just boom. Oh, you rolled a 3 on that 12-sided die? I guess we're going to the Arctic tundra today. And I already know all the different things that they can possibly run into. And the same goes for the Lich's Library and the Jurassic Jungle and the Deadly Desert and the Cliff Tops of Insanity. Like, by permanently setting up each of those with their own thematic monsters, it makes my prep time so much easier because I've already done it.
Well, and that totally makes sense. For with your campaigns, though, especially with the paid games, I assume that you have situations where people are coming in and out all the time. How do you incorporate somebody that's like new with their backstory, or do you like make them wait a little while, 2 or 3 sessions before you start incorporating that? How do you handle that?
When we've had new players come in, I try to introduce them as quickly as possible.
Okay.
Like especially with Curse of Strahd, where we've had characters die. And sometimes this is because a player is leaving the table, and sometimes it is because they did not roll great and decided, yeah, no, that's a fitting end. I want to play someone new now. And in those cases, like I want to know as early as possible, what is this PC's theme? What is their driving want? What is the thing they want more than anything else? That is super important. And also, what is their backstory? Where are they coming from? Mm-hmm. So that in as very little time as possible, I can incorporate them without, like shoehorning something in. And it's perfectly fine to hang a lampshade on it. Like with a campaign like Adrift, where half their time is spent in a flashback and half their time is spent on the island, we had a character join about a month or two after they had started, and we basically just hung a lampshade on like, oh, here's character 5 that you had not mentioned up until now, but always knew. And like they had just gone from like a background character to like one of the crew on the ship to being someone that like our characters interacted with more on the ship. And then on the island, they would run into that person who had been toughing it out alone that whole time. And then like, oh, good, more survivors.
Got it.
And the same thing with like Curse of Strahd. Barovia is a deadly environment. So it is entirely justifiable for a player to come in and their backstory is they just lost their entire party. They are the sole survivor from a disaster down the road involving a haunted barn and pissed off Amish ghosts or what have you. And now they are on their own and they see a light and like, oh, that's the wizard's tower where you guys coincidentally are also reaching from a completely different direction. What happens when you don't immediately trust each other? And sparks fly. It's wonderful.
Very cool. Thinking back from when you first started game mastering, do you have as much fun now game mastering professional games as you did at the beginning for your friends?
I think I would say I have even more.
Okay.
Because there is something vindicating about not just setting a table and telling a story for friends. Like, I'm setting a table and telling a story that people are paying to come enjoy. Like, they have invested not only their time, but their money in my ability to help entertain and distract and draw them in to an experience that pulls them completely out of the modern world, even if only for 3 to 4 hours. And like the experience behind me now, the years I have put into storytelling and acting and screenwriting and writing books and things, like all of that has informed the method I use now, where I'm looking forward to every session.
Very cool. All right, let's just out of curiosity, how many games a week do you run?
It varies. Like I run a game every Sunday, a game every Monday, a game every other Wednesday, and like games Friday and Saturday, catch as catch can. So we're talking about anywhere between 5 and 7 games a week.
Okay.
I know GMs that run even more than that, like they run 2 games a day. I have had 2 game days and have needed a lot of lozenges for the second round, or a cup of cold coffee to make sure my energy stays up. One of my favorite snacks to bring to a game are these little energy balls that are made of granola and chocolate chips and a little bit of syrup and a couple other things. Like, we call them energy balls because you can just, fill a little bowl with like 5 or 6 of them, pop them in as you go, and like it keeps your blood sugar up and it keeps you going as the game goes on, so that you're not flagging in low blood sugar by the end of the game, because nobody likes it. Okay, so the dragon shows up and you all die.
I need a nap.
Right?
All right. Last set of questions here. We're going to talk about the game master's role in online TTRPG community. What do you think is the biggest challenge facing game masters in the modern TTRPG community?
That is an excellent question. I think a big part of it is the changing terrain of technology that's available. I think that the changing, shifting rule sets of things like going from 5e to the 2024 rule set of D&D can be an issue. And I think it's important to stay informed, to stay on top of what's available, so that even if you're sticking to 5e rules, you're doing it for a reason and not just because, well, I don't like change. A great tool I love is 5e.tools. It's an online encyclopedia. It's a reference of everything that has been released that's not technically homebrew. And despite the URL, they have updated a lot of their rules to 2024. There are challenges, like filling tables and staying motivated and feeling isolated. One of the things that I'm trying to do more of is play more games in public at great game shops like Geeky Teas, where I can sit across from an actual table with people that I've never played with before. Adventurers League is a great tool to use. They're basically beginner first-timer games of D&D, where people can try on a game and see how it goes, and you're not even responsible for who signs up. You just check off the list that, yes, I'm willing to GM at this event, and I will run this Adventurers League approved setting and campaign adventure that'll last 3 hours, and I'll meet a handful of new people, and maybe some of them will come back to one of my tables, and frequently they do.
So, how has the rise of actual play content and streaming? Okay, so this question actually goes to you as a podcaster. With all the material that's out there right now, with the streaming and the how-tos and whatnot, how has that affected the community? What have you seen as far as your experiences? Has it been a benefit? Has it been a negative? I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Been a benefit. Like, I adjudicated one of the contests last year and saw actual play content, whether it was audio or video or both, of almost 80 different actual play tables out there. And one of my biggest takeaways was there's room for everybody. Fascists notwithstanding, there's room for everybody. There's room for the grimdark alien setting you've always wanted to tell. There's room for the lighthearted Star Trek Lower Decks game you've always wanted to run. There's room for 3 different renditions of Curse of Strahd. The fact that these... because I'm also on Blue Sky and Twitter and Reddit and Discord on a bunch of different channels where pro GMs give each other tips. They share success stories. They give links to their latest episodes so that they can cross-promote. One of the things I'm doing with this season of Sladian Games is each episode is its own sporting event starring another podcast team, so that their audiences can see what we do and our audiences can find an entire new podcasting team to get hooked on. We want to help each other. We want to support each other because we're not taking away from each other either, There's just as big a Patreon network of these people that you can find on Reddit, and of course Patreon itself. Blue Sky is a great place to find new actual plays to listen to. And like shows like the one I do of The Joy of GMing, where we'll have on to interview like GMs like yourself, or gaming experts, or writers, or game designers, people that have some kind of stake in making things better than they currently are. Those are the people I like having on my show. Those are the people I like talking to because they move the needle forward. They're like, oh, we can increase our expectations. We can try to do an even better job. And that's inclusive. That's diverse. That's as many different kinds of voices at the table as we can get, just so long as they're not talking over each other. We want to make sure everybody can be heard, you know?
Great. How do you feel about the responsibility of representing diversity and inclusion in your games, both at your table and inside your stories?
I think diversity is incredibly important for a number of reasons beyond just it's the politically correct thing to do. Stories with only one kind of voice in them will be rather monotone, in addition to being monochrome. Stories where you have different kinds of people at the table brings different perspectives. It's not as broadening as travel and visiting other countries, but having people of different nationalities, of different sexualities at the table, and like being unafraid to include and hear from people that you haven't necessarily heard from before, rather than focusing on, oh, it's going to make me uncomfortable. Think about how it can expand your comfort zone to include what it did not include before. Because a writer who has only read one type of author is going to be limited in the stories they can tell. Just the same way that a GM who only works with a certain type of player will be limiting themselves in how awesome their stories can be. The more that we just tap into the variety of minds and hearts that are around us, the more we broaden and diversify and richen the stories we can tell with ingredients from the pantry, the narrative pantry, we didn't even know existed before we sat down with that person, for instance.
All right. What advice would you give to aspiring GMs looking to make a name for themselves online?
A couple of things. Like, I would definitely suggest figure out ahead of time what kind of stories you want to focus on, why. Because if you don't know why, if you don't know what your motivation is beyond, well, I want to be out there too, you're gonna fail. Figure out what makes you distinct. Figure out what makes you unique. And do some research, because you're not going to be the first all queer table. You're not going to be the first all drag queens table. You're not going to be the first to use sound and music and blah blah blah. Like, the bells and whistles are great, but your approach needs to stand out in some significant way, or you're just going to blend in with the rabble that don't put in the effort. For myself, part of it is that we tell queer inclusive stories. Part of it is that we tell stories that screw with time. I love screwing with time. But also the dungeon maestro method of bringing in the spotlight one by one to each character so that we collaboratively make sweet music is my approach. And I find that works for me. Like, I guarantee that whatever kind of story you want to tell can find its audience. The tabletop audience can be incredibly supportive and vocal once they know you exist. Also, be prepared to be consistent. Like, I still make this mistake myself as an actual player because I'm doing so much of the work alone. But like, keeping to a schedule of weekly or semi-weekly or monthly episodes, once you set expectations, you've got to try to keep meeting those expectations, or you're going to lose the listeners that you have. Also, don't be afraid to ask for help. Reach out to your community, meet some new communities, make some friends, and then ask around. Like, hey, is anyone here an aspiring video engineer? Hey, does anyone here great with voices that could help bring us bring some character and flavor to our table? ask for help. You do not have to do it all by yourself. You shouldn't do it all by yourself. Because if you do, it will immensely slow down your progress. And on that, I speak from experience.
That makes sense. Okay, last question I've got for you. This is coming the approach from not as a game master, but from a podcaster. The different projects that you talk about doing, and it kind of encompasses a bunch of different deals. But what's your vision for the future of tabletop RPG, and how do you see yourself contributing to that evolution?
The future of tabletop RPG is diversity. It's diversity of genre. It's diversity of game systems. It's diversity of the casts of tables that people come to and play with and expect. And it is going to be this never-ending panoply of different stories from different voices. Dimension 20 has been a huge inspiration for us, not just because of the energy they have or the fact that they have, like, you know, stand-up comics and improv comics in their stable of regular players, but the fact that it's an anthology. Because one of the biggest limits to something like Critical Role, where it's one long narrative, where now they give, I swear to God, there are college courses being taught by people like the inimitable M. Friedman on how to catch up with hundreds upon hundreds of hours of listening of a story. And I think that anthologies are a much stronger, more nimble way of telling stories, so that you have like a dozen episodes in the world of Doctor Who, and then a dozen episodes of brutal blood sport involving all these different characters that may or may not survive, and then a season of stories set on a mysterious island where you don't know what the hell's going on half the time, or a season of stories set in the suburbs where nothing is what it seems like. You can tell all of these different stories with all these different rule sets, and as long as you make deliberate choices, you're not stranding your audience. Like, they don't have to listen to 800 episodes to catch up with where the hell you are now. You know, if season 1 is completely independent of season 2, then they don't have to feel bad about, like, oh, I just hopped on. One of the things I love about Doctor Who is, and one of the reasons it stayed so successful, is that they are constantly reinventing themselves.
Sure. Very true.
Every 3 or 4 seasons, they change doctors, they change showrunners, they'll change composers, exactly. So that, you know, I mean, hell, Stephen Moffat cheekily called one of his season openers The Pilot, as if that was a pilot for new viewers to come on. So my favorite definition of a hack is someone that just does the same thing over and over again without ever trying to improve or change things. I've played with hacks and found it rather unsatisfying. I am constantly trying to improve, and that means taking risks. That means trying different things. Like, I didn't know if running a game where half the game is set months or possibly years before the other half was going to work. And so far it has, because they're leveling up here and they're leveling up here, so that, like, they start at level 1 on the ship and on the island, and then they'll level up on 2, and then they'll be at level 2 on the ship, and so forth, and keep getting higher. But I would not have discovered that if I hadn't said, you know, I haven't seen that before. Let's see if that works. Be open to experiment. Be open to trying things and it not working out. Because if you can learn from a mistake, it's not a mistake. It is a lesson. And, like, I think one of the biggest limits to creatives, both in gaming and other places, is this fear of looking or sounding foolish. And that prohibits risk. And risk is where the magic happens. Risk is where you really surprise yourself. And I think that's how we can push ourselves as creatives.
Very cool. Case, that's all the questions that I've got on my list. I thank you for taking time to just articulate everything. You did a magnificent job in regards to explaining yourself, and I think that there was a lot of really good information here to learn. But if you wouldn't mind, take a couple minutes and talk about your projects, promote the things that you're going on. What does the audience need to know about you that they can click on some of the links at the bottom of this video to learn about you and your projects?
Thank you so much. This has been an absolute privilege. You've been a great interviewer, and I've really enjoyed talking with you. So we have a couple of things going on. We have Narrative Feats, a tabletop anthology. We are currently in season 2 of Sladium Games, which is D&D that is set in an incredibly brutal, violent setting. I love it. I can't get enough of it. Our first season was Anywhere But Now, a Doctor Who anthology that had a little gentler storytelling, but we love incorporating music and sound and all of this immersion to help eliminate as many obstacles to suspending that disbelief. Like, our defining tagline is stories told like you were there. And I want to keep telling stories that make you feel like you were there. So we've got Narrative Feats, we've got Anywhere But Now. Those are the first 2 seasons of our podcast. You can find us on startplaying.games/GM/Casey Jones. And you can come play in the Sladium. You can come join the island on Adrift. You can come get the crap scared out of you in Curse of Strahd, because I absolutely love horror. Terror and horror are one of my absolute favorite genres, and getting to use those in the Doctor Who stories for those hide behind the sofa moments were like some of the highlights of season 1. But with Curse of Strahd, I get to use the frightening ambience anytime I wish, and I will make your blood run cold.
Oh, that's awesome.
Thank you. You can come join our Discord, hang out with other players, see what games are coming up. We also give, on a fairly regular basis, a workshop on character voices, because not everybody can do accents, and that's fine. This whole thing is an instrument, and the more you understand that, the more you can get into it, and play with the settings. The more diversity and range you're going to find in your character voices, and we give that workshop on a semi-regular basis. But yeah, come to our Discord. We're on Blue Sky as Narrative Feats. We're on X still as Narrative Feats. We have a YouTube channel that is very anemic and needs a lot of love and a lot of clips. So that's one of the things I'm working on. But yeah, those are the things we've got going on.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank you again so much for taking time to visit with us. And I know that audience out there, they're going to have questions. And folks, I want to encourage y'all to interact. Push your questions down there for Casey. Post them down there for me. If you have points of clarification you need, if you have some suggestions, some advice, some questions that I could be asking, some recommendations, put that stuff out there. We love interacting. So I need to get this out there real fast, but just remember, the gods demand tribute. Offer a like, spread the word, and subscribe. So now that I got that out of the way. Casey, again, thank you so much, folks. We look forward to seeing you guys with the next one, and we'll talk to y'all soon. Thank you, and God bless.